Welcome to the debate. Imagine a political system so tightly wound, so deeply paranoid about its own voters, that a sitting United States senator feels compelled to secretly withdraw his candidacy.
Right, and doing it exactly 5 minutes before a filing deadline.
Exactly. 5 minutes before the deadline, just to trick his own party's electorate into accepting a hand-picked successor. I mean, that isn't some hypothetical thought experiment. That literally just happened in Montana.
Yeah, it's wild.
And it is exactly why we are here today. We are looking at the June 2, 2026 primary elections. Specifically, we're going really deep into the critical battlegrounds of California, Iowa, and Montana.
Because these aren't just local contests.
No, not at all. As we approach the 2028 presidential cycle, these races are basically the vital early stress tests of the entire national political climate.
They really are. And, it's a climate that feels increasingly volatile. We're drawing today on some really extensive reporting from CalMatters, analysis from the Brookings Institution, the Ellis Insight, and historical election data.
Right, to unpack one massive central question. Do the 2026 primaries in these key states demonstrate that the two major parties are successfully using their structural advantages to consolidate power?
And this is the crux of it, do they reveal a system that is fundamentally fracturing under the weight of, ideological extremes, deep intra-party tension, and these anti-establishment insurgencies?
And that is exactly where we divide today. I'll be arguing that despite the surface-level noise and the headlines, institutional pragmatism and structural mechanics are effectively securing party power.
Okay.
The establishment is adapting and it is surviving.
And I will be arguing that insurgent populism and ideological fractures are successfully disrupting that traditional establishment. Those structural mechanics you're talking about, they're becoming obsolete right before our eyes.
Well, let's start with my perspective, which is grounded in the sheer, undeniable resilience of traditional party structures.
Let's hear it.
The political establishment is demonstrating this remarkable ability to engineer outcomes. They are selecting pragmatic candidates even when the environment seems incredibly chaotic.
I guess it depends on how you define chaotic.
Sure, but if you look at California's Proposition 50, you see the establishment literally rewriting the rules of the game to redistrict 5 Republican seats so they lean heavily Democratic.
Mm-hmm.
And in Iowa, you see Rob Sand, a moderate Democrat, running a completely unopposed gubernatorial campaign. Why? Because the party machinery coldly prioritized electability over ideological purity.
Yeah, but at what cost?
Well, yes, primaries naturally invite loud fringe voices. I'm not denying that. But the underlying mechanics of these 2026 midterms show the establishment successfully maneuvering to protect its majorities.
See, I look at the exact same landscape, and I see a duopoly losing its monopoly. The system is completely defined by unbridgeable intra-party fractures right now.
Unbridgeable? That's a strong word.
It is, but look at the undeniable viability of candidates who actively despise the establishment. In California, you have a 60-candidate gubernatorial primary that is pure chaos.
It's a crowded field, sure.
It's overrun. It's overrun by billionaire self-funders and literal reality television stars. And in Iowa, the Republican establishment is staring down the barrel of a convention floor fight because of the state's 35% threshold rule.
Which we'll definitely get into.
Absolutely. And then in Montana, the incredible fundraising success of independent Seth Bodnar proves that voters are actively seeking alternatives to these elite partisan games. The fortress walls are breached.
Well, California is actually the perfect place to test this theory, because California shows us what happens when an establishment faces a supposedly chaotic open system, and yet they still manage to assert total control.
Total control? I don't know about that.
Let's look at the impact of the state's top 2 open primary system, right? Alongside the massive battle to succeed term-limited Governor Gavin Newsom and the fallout from Proposition 50. I view California as a masterclass in structural engineering.
A masterclass in survival, maybe.
Take Prop 50. For our listeners who might not be deep in the weeds of California ballot initiatives, explain exactly what the Democrats did here, because the mechanics really are brilliant.
I definitely wouldn't call it brilliant. I'd call it a brazen circumvention of democracy. But structurally, mechanically, here's what happened. California has an independent redistricting commission, right?
Right.
And it was designed specifically to take map drawing out of the hands of partisan politicians. But the Democratic supermajority utilized this constitutional loophole
By passing Proposition 50. Exactly. They passed Prop 50 and got it approved by voters under the guise of electoral fairness adjustments. And by doing that, they essentially granted the state legislature the emergency authority to bypass the independent commission for specific targeted districts.
Exactly.
And the result of that? They legally gerrymandered 5 formerly Republican-held congressional seats to lean Democratic.
Which is incredibly controversial.
But it worked. They used a ballot proposition to rewrite the battlefield. That is not a party losing its grip. That is a party utilizing the levers of power with absolute ruthless efficiency to secure its institutional advantage for the next decade.
But let's look at the immediate consequences of that maneuver. You call it ruthless efficiency, but on the ground it's created intra-party panic. Take incumbent Republican Representative Kevin Kiley.
Okay, Kiley's an interesting case.
Because of those newly drawn, heavily gerrymandered Prop 50 maps, Kinley looked at the math and realized he couldn't win as a Republican, so he abandoned the Republican Party entirely.
He dropped the label, yeah.
He's running as an independent in a new district. Now, he explicitly stated he'll still caucus with Republicans if elected, but think about that. The fact that a sitting mainstream congressman feels his best path to survival is shutting his own party label.
It's a strategic adaptation.
It shows these structural manipulations are destabilizing the very order they were meant to protect. When your politicians are dropping their party affiliation just to survive your efficient maps, the system is breaking.
See, I'd argue Kinley's move is a localized anomaly. It's just a reaction to a map working exactly as intended by the Democratic majority. They wanted to squeeze him out, and they did.
Squeeze him out of the party, sure, but not out of the race.
But let's zoom out to the state's highest office, the gubernatorial race, because this is where the establishment's resilience truly shines. Initially, this looked like a disaster for them.
Oh, absolute disaster.
Because Newsom is term limited, and we have this top 2 open primary where all candidates run on the same ballot and the top 2 advance regardless of party. We have a massive 60-candidate field.
Right, and there were very real fears that the Democratic vote would be so splintered among 40 different Democrats, the 2 Republicans might actually slip through to the November ballot.
Which is the fatal flaw in the top 2 system.
Exactly.
But those fears have dramatically eased in recent months. Why? Because the party machinery kicked into gear. The electorate is actively consolidating around highly credentialed, pragmatic establishment figures.
You're talking about Xavier Becerra.
Specifically Xavier Becerra. Yes, we are talking about a former 12-term congressman, the former state attorney general, and the former Secretary of Health and Human Services. He is the establishment.
He is definitely the establishment choice.
Think of the top 2 primary like a centrifuge. Yes, it initially spins up this chaotic, blinding mix of 60 candidates. But the sheer gravitational force of the system, the need for statewide name recognition, deep institutional donor networks, and party infrastructure, it ultimately separates the heavy, institutional pragmatists from the lightweight fringe.
A centrifuge. Okay.
Yeah, the mechanics literally force voters toward traditional stability.
Look, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. That centrifuge analogy is neat, but it completely ignores the external forces capable of smashing that machine to pieces.
External forces like what?
Namely, unlimited financial brute force and populist spectacle. The establishment might desperately want Xavier Becerra, but the system is incredibly vulnerable to hijacking. Enter Tom Steyer.
Ah, the billionaire.
The billionaire who has injected $213 million of his own personal fortune into this gubernatorial race. Let's talk about the mechanics of campaign finance for a second to understand how absurd this is.
It is a staggering amount of money, I'll admit.
California has a voluntary campaign spending limit for gubernatorial candidates, which sits right around $11.7 million. Steyer is outspending the theoretical bounds of the system by a factor of nearly 20.
But money doesn't always equal votes. We've seen self-funders fail spectacularly in California before. Meg Whitman comes to mind.
Sure, but Meg Whitman wasn't running in a fractured 60-person top 2 primary. In a field this crowded, $213 million doesn't just buy television ads. It acts as a structural bypass.
A bypass how?
Steyer is essentially purchasing his own private political party. He's buying voter data files, he's funding massive independent field operations, and he's dominating the digital landscape.
But is it translating to a structural shift?
Yes, because he is not running as an establishment pragmatist. He is running hard to the left, explicitly backed by Bernie Sanders' organization, Our Revolution.
Which the Brookings report touched on.
Exactly. The Brookings report explicitly questions whether the left wing of the post-Trump Democratic Party is gaining structural power. Steyer's ability to essentially buy his way past the establishment's preferred candidates suggests that if you have enough money, your centrifuge just doesn't apply to you.
Volume doesn't automatically equate to capture, though. Steyer is loud and his money makes him a factor, absolutely. But institutional gravity usually wins out in the general election when voters actually start paying attention to governance records rather than just ad saturation.
Then let's talk about where institutional gravity is failing entirely, the Los Angeles mayoral race. If you want to see the ultimate populist threat to your establishment centrifuge, this is it.
I had a feeling you were going to bring up Spencer Pratt.
I have to. It is the most glaring example of a fractured system. Karen Bass, the incumbent Democrat, the consummate establishment figure, is facing a legitimate, terrifyingly viable challenge from a reality television star.
It's definitely a bizarre race.
Spencer Pratt is a registered Republican who is campaigning almost exclusively using AI-generated videos of himself as a street-fighting superhero cleaning up the streets of LA.
Okay, look, we can laugh at the absurdity of an AI street fighter campaign.
We can laugh, but he has received a nod of approval from Donald Trump. And he is polling real, actual polling numbers. And the reason he is viable is because Bass's institutional armor is cracked.
Because of the progressive blowback?
Yes, she's facing massive progressive blowback from her own side. City Council member Nithya Raman launched a last-minute challenge from the left because Bass was heavily criticized for being in Ghana during the city's worst wildfires this past year.
Right, the optics on that trip were terrible.
So let's look at the mechanics here. You have an establishment incumbent being squeezed by an insurgent progressive on her left and an AI-wielding reality star on her right. If the centrifuge works as you say, Pratt would be spun out into absolute oblivion.
He probably will be, eventually.
Or right now, in a major American city preparing to host the 2028 Olympics, he is a serious contender. That is the definition of a chaotic system breaking down.
I will concede that the LA mayor's race is an absolute spectacle. And Pratt's use of AI is a novel, frankly concerning campaign tactic that we are definitely going to see more of nationwide.
Unquestionably.
But municipal races, even in a city as large as Los Angeles, often harbor eccentricities that simply do not translate to statewide or federal structural shifts. Even with Steyer's millions and Pratt's AI superhero videos, the ultimate outcome in November will almost certainly feature traditional party actors holding the actual levers of power.
But the path to November is fundamentally altering what those parties look like. The fact that the Brookings Institution is tracking whether Democratic Socialist candidates, like Etienne Razas in the 34th District, can topple moderate incumbents like Vincent Gonzalez, it shows the internal tension.
Gonzalez survived that primary, though.
He's survived, yes, but the pressure from the left is constant, it's well-funded, and it is fundamentally changing the party's platform.
That it becomes vulnerable to hijackers with deep pockets or viral AI videos.
Right.
But Iowa gives us the exact inverse of that problem. Iowa relies on strict, closed, party-controlled mechanisms. It's a system designed to empower the establishment and enforce order. And I argue that despite some friction, it is working beautifully for them.
See, I strongly disagree. I think Iowa is the clearest example in the country right now of what happens when a party's rules are so strict, they accidentally lock the party out of its own decision-making process. It exposes massive intra-party division.
Well, let's lay out the mechanics of the Iowa system for the listener because it is incredibly unique, right?
So the structural crisis in Iowa is happening on the Republican side, specifically in the open gubernatorial race. Governor Kim Reynolds is retiring.
Right, leaving a huge vacuum.
And you have a 5-way GOP primary to replace her. Now, the establishment's presumed favorite is Representative Randy Feenstra, who has the golden ticket, Donald Trump's endorsement.
Usually a lock in a state like Iowa.
Usually. But Feenstra is bleeding support rapidly to Zach Lyme, a political newcomer and businessman who is running this aggressive populist campaign.
Which happens in primaries. Frontrunners face challengers. It's not a crisis, it's just a campaign.
It is a structural crisis because of Iowa law. Let's explain the 35% threshold rule. Decades ago, Iowa instituted a rule stating that a candidate must hit 35% of the primary vote to secure the nomination outright.
Which historically made a lot of sense.
The original intent behind this was actually to ensure consensus, right? The establishment wanted to prevent the scenario where a crowded field of 6 candidates splits the vote and a radical fringe candidate wins the nomination with just 20% of the base.
A perfectly pragmatic rule to ensure the nominee has broad support going into the general.
Except, ironically, now it's doing the exact opposite. Because the GOP base is so deeply fractured between Feenstra's institutional wing and Land's populist insurgency, there is a very real mathematical probability that they will split the vote so evenly that no one reaches that 35% threshold. Do you know what happens then?
It goes to a convention.
Exactly. The decision is entirely stripped away from the primary voters. The nominee is decided by delegates at a state Republican convention in a literal backroom floor fight.
Which is a mechanism of the party.
But we are talking about rules committees, delegate whipping, and smoke-filled rooms. That exposes a party so deeply at war with itself, split between its MAGA wing and its traditional conservative wing, that the voters themselves cannot render a decisive verdict. If a party has to throw out the votes of its own electorate to pick a winner, the establishment is failing.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on what is happening in Iowa. You are focusing entirely on a hypothetical Republican floor fight, but look at what the Democrats are doing in that exact same gubernatorial race.
Okay, let's look at the Democrats.
It proves the exact opposite of your fracture theory. When faced with a toss-up race and a genuine, generational opportunity to take back the governor's mansion for the first time since 2011, the Democratic establishment didn't fracture. They demonstrated ruthless, unified pragmatism.
You're talking about Rob Sand.
Yes, State Auditor Rob Sand. He is the sole Democrat currently holding statewide office in Iowa. He won his re-election in 2022 with exactly 50.09% of the vote.
Skin of his teeth.
He survived by the skin of his teeth, absolutely. But he has deep rural roots, he hunts, he appeals to independent voters, and he understands how to speak to a red-leaning state.
Right.
Now, what did the Democratic Party infrastructure do when this gubernatorial seat opened up? Did they fracture? Did the progressive wing mount a massive primary challenge against him to demand ideological purity on climate or healthcare?
Well, no.
No. They completely cleared the field.
But clearing the field for an incumbent statewide official is standard operating procedure, not some grand stroke of strategic genius.
But think about how a field gets cleared in modern politics. It takes immense backroom pressure. It requires party bosses cutting off donor access to potential challengers. It requires a unified front.
I mean, sure, it takes coordination.
Sand is running entirely unopposed in the Democratic gubernatorial primary. There is no 35% threshold problem for the Democrats because there is only one name on the ballot. He has outraised every single Republican candidate because he isn't wasting a dime on a primary fight.
That's true, his war chest is massive right now.
The establishment looked at the board, identified their most electable, pragmatic moderate, and unified behind him instantly. If ideological purity is the driving force of the modern electorate, as you claim with your focus on insurgency, why did Iowa Democrats completely fall in line with a moderate rural pragmatist?
Because the progressives in Iowa are focusing all of their energy and resources elsewhere, specifically the U.S. Senate primary. The gubernatorial race was conceded to Sand, sure, but the Senate race is a perfect mirror of the national ideological tension that Brookings outlined. Joni Ernst is retiring.
Wait, let's clarify exactly why Senator Ernst is retiring, because it fundamentally proves my point about establishment control and structural mechanics.
Okay, fair point.
Senator Ernst didn't just decide to retire to spend more time with her family. She was forced out.
She made a catastrophic, unforced error.
Yes. For those who missed it, she was caught on tape making a deeply sarcastic, dismissive comment at a cemetery regarding Medicaid funding cuts, saying, quote, We are all going to die anyway.
Just terrible optics.
The optics were horrific. The backlash was instantaneous and severe. Her polling cratered overnight.
It was politically fatal.
But look at how the Republican establishment reacted to that crisis. They did not panic. They did not let the seat descend into a chaotic, wide-open primary where a fringe candidate could sneak in.
They moved quickly. I'll give them that.
They immediately pushed Ernst toward the exit. They secured her resignation announcement. And within hours, they elevated Representative Ashley Hinson to protect the seat.
Yeah, Hinson stepped right in.
Hinson instantly locked down Donald Trump's endorsement. Big donor money flowed in, and they cleared the top tier of the field. The party recognized a critical vulnerability that could cost them the Senate majority, and they structurally maneuvered to eliminate it with surgical precision.
They managed the Republican side of that specific crisis, sure, but look at the Democratic proxy war to challenge Hinson. The Democrats need 4 seats to flip the U.S. Senate globally, and Iowa is a primary target.
It's a vital seat.
But the party is completely paralyzed over how to win it. You have State Representative Josh Turek. He's a moderate who literally flipped a red district blue. He actively courts independent voters, avoids culture war topics, and focuses heavily on infrastructure.
A very strong general election profile.
Right. But on the exact opposite side, you have State Senator Zach Walz. He comes from a solid blue, university-heavy district. He is openly criticizing Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on the campaign trail, and he is courting committed left-wing progressives.
They represent 2 distinct wings of the party, definitely.
This isn't just a primary. It is a profound structural disagreement about the future of the party. Do Democrats run to the center to win over moderates in a red-leaning state like Iowa, or do they run hard to the left to energize the base and drive up turnout?
That is a healthy primary debate.
It is a fracture. Walz attacking Chuck Schumer during a primary shows that the anti-establishment sentiment is burning just as hot on the left as it is on the right. If the establishment had total control, like they did with Rob Sand, Walz would have been quietly sidelined to let Turek run to the middle.
They just couldn't clear the field this time.
They couldn't do it. The progressive base wouldn't let them.
But a competitive primary between 2 strong candidates doesn't mean the establishment is failing. It means the system is naturally vetting the best candidate for the general election. You want candidates battle-tested.
Unless the system fails to vet anyone at all and just pisses off the entire electorate, which brings us right back to the threat of that Iowa Republican convention.
Right, the 35% rule.
If Feenstra and Lahn force a convention, the party elites are going to override the will of the voters in a smoke-filled room. That is incredibly damaging to institutional credibility. You cannot tell voters their primary ballots don't matter and expect them to show up in November.
Well, if we are talking about the danger of bypassing voters, that brings us perfectly to our final battleground. Because if Iowa might theoretically use a convention to bypass voters after a split primary, Montana's establishment bypassed their voters before the ballots were even printed.
And it was an absolute outrage. It was a stunt that has spectacularly backfired on them.
Let's walk through exactly what happened in the Montana Senate race, because mechanically, it is a masterclass in structural politics and elite maneuvering.
It was a subversion of the democratic process.
Let me narrate the timeline for the listeners. I want everyone to appreciate the breathtaking precision of this maneuver. The filing deadline to run in the Montana Republican primary was 5 p.m. on March 5th.
Okay.
2-term incumbent Republican Senator Steve Daines was universally expected to run for re-election. He had the war chest, he had the staff in place, but at 4:52 p.m., exactly 8 minutes before the absolute legal deadline to file paperwork with the Secretary of State, former U.S. Attorney Kurt Almo quietly walks into the office and files his paperwork to run for the Senate.
Right, just slips right in.
Exactly 3 minutes later, at 4:55 p.m., Senator Daines formally withdraws his candidacy.
Unbelievable.
At 5:02 p.m., 2 minutes after the deadline has officially closed and no one else can legally enter the race, Daines publicly announces his retirement and immediately endorses Kurt Alme.
It's just so blatant.
Moments later, as if completely choreographed, which it obviously was, Alme receives sweeping endorsements from Donald Trump and Governor Greg Gianforte.
It was a coordinated bait and switch. They lied to their own party.
It was brutal. I will easily concede that.
But look at the sheer structural result. By executing the switcheroo in the final 8 minutes, the establishment completely blocked any other high-profile, perhaps more populist or unpredictable Republicans from entering the race.
They locked everyone else out.
They bypassed what would have been a profoundly costly, bruising, millions of dollars primary fight. They handpicked a successor they trusted, they installed him, and Almy instantly polled at 73% in the primary against a couple of unknown, underfunded challengers who just happened to have filed weeks earlier.
It's effective, sure, but it's completely cynical.
The establishment recognized they wanted Almy, and they utilized the absolute limits of the structural filing rules to make it happen without spending a dime on primary television ads.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the massive, unprecedented blowback? You cannot execute a stunt like that and expect the electorate, especially a fiercely independent-minded electorate like Montana's, to just politely swallow it.
They were definitely angry.
It spectacularly backfired on them. The Montana Republican Party infrastructure was so outraged by Daines's maneuver that the state party officially refused to endorse any candidates in federal races this cycle.
Which is pretty unprecedented.
They issued a blistering public statement demanding a competitive primary process. Let me be clear about what that means. When the state party apparatus officially revolts against its own sitting senator and its own governor, the establishment is not functioning efficiently. It is at war with itself.
A strongly worded press release from the state party doesn't change the mathematical fact that Kurt Alma is on the ballot and is virtually guaranteed the Republican nomination. They can be angry, but they were outmaneuvered.
But the anger didn't just result in a press release. It created a massive structural opening in the general election, which proved the two-party establishment is completely failing to read the room.
You're talking about Seth Bodnar?
Because voters across the spectrum are furious at being manipulated, you now have the unprecedented rise of an independent candidate, Seth Bodnar.
The former president of the University of Montana.
Yes. An Iraq War veteran, a Rhodes Scholar, a highly credible, serious leader. And because the Republican establishment played cynical games with the filing deadline, and because the Democratic field in Montana is historically weak right now, their frontrunner, Riley Neal, is polling at a dismal 24%. Bodnar has stepped directly into the void.
He definitely saw an opening.
Look at the mechanics of his campaign. Look at the fundraising. Bodnar has raised $1.35 million as an independent. He is heavily outraising the establishment's hand-picked golden child, Kurt Alm, who is sitting at $924,000.
Bodnar has money, which is impressive. But third-party candidates always hit a structural ceiling. Voters eventually default to partisan lines when they get in the booth.
Not this time. Head-to-head polls show Bodnar tying Alme exactly 50-50. That is unheard of for an independent in a modern, high-stakes U.S. Senate race.
It's definitely a tight poll.
And look at how he built his coalition. He is officially endorsed by former Democratic Senator Jon Tester, who held that seat for 18 years. He is endorsed by former Republican Governor Mark Rassicot, and he's endorsed by the co-chair of the Forward Party, Andrew Yang.
That is a very weird coalition.
He has built a massive cross-party coalition fueled entirely by voter disgust with elite partisan games. The two-party system fractured in Montana at 4:55 p.m. on March 5th, and Seth Bodnar is the direct structural result of that fracture.
Wait, pause on that for a second. I have to strongly challenge your framing of Bodnar here. You are presenting him as this populist insurgent, a symbol of ideological disruption tearing down the walls.
That's exactly what he is.
But is Bodnar's success actually proof of a broad ideological shift, or is he simply benefiting from the very unique, highly localized anger over Daines's 4:55 p.m. filing stunt? If Daines hadn't done that, does Bodnar even exist as a candidate?
I think it can absolutely be both. The stunt was the spark, sure, but the dry tinder of anti-establishment frustration has been piling up for years.
Furthermore, if this is a true anti-establishment ideological movement, why is it relying on the endorsements of the ultimate party insiders?
What do you mean?
Jon Tester was a Democratic institution in Montana for almost 2 decades. Mark Rassicot is a former Republican governor and literally the former chairman of the Republican National Committee. If Bodnar is tearing down the establishment, why is he using the establishment's retired architects to legitimize his campaign?
Because those architects recognize that the current iterations of their own parties have become entirely untenable. Rassicot has been deeply alienated from the MAGA-dominated GOP for years.
True.
And Tester knows the Democratic brand is currently so toxic in statewide Montana races that a traditional Democrat simply cannot win, which is exactly why Democratic opposition has essentially collapsed in favor of an independent.
But they're still pulling the strings.
The fact that traditional insiders are abandoning their lifelong party labels to support an independent proves my central thesis. The traditional structures are failing. The parties cannot hold their own elders, let alone their voters.
See, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because I argue it proves the exact opposite. The establishment is infinitely adaptable. If the Democratic Party power brokers in Montana realize they cannot win a Senate seat with a D next to their name, throwing their weight behind an independent who aligns with them on 80% of key issues is a deeply pragmatic structural move.
You think they planned this?
They aren't collapsing. They are outsourcing the race to remain competitive against Almy. It's a calculated survival tactic.
It's a desperate retreat. And what about the House races? Look at MTO1. Ryan Zinke's retirement opened up a congressional seat in deep red territory.
Right. Zinke stepping down was a surprise.
The progressive wing is attempting to capitalize there with Sam Forstag, a literal smoke jumper who just got endorsed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Even in real Montana, you have the progressive left pushing the boundaries, refusing to concede territory to moderate pragmatism. The tension isn't just at the top of the ticket, it's everywhere.
As we step back and look at this entire landscape, from the complex redistricting battles in California, to the strict threshold rules in Iowa, to the filing deadline drama in Montana, I stand firmly by my initial premise.
Let's hear the summary.
Despite the undeniable noise of 60-person fields, despite the intra-party squabbles and the outrage over backroom maneuvers, the structural mechanics of politics remain the dominant, driving forces shaping our electoral realities. We see it in the calculated use of Proposition 50.
Which was a loophole.
We see it in the Democratic Party effectively clearing the field for a proven winner like Rob Sand. We see it in the strategic, if ruthless, passing the baton from Daines to Almy. The establishment is not collapsing. It is continually adapting, engineering outcomes, and surviving the pressures of the moment.
And I maintain that their survival is becoming increasingly precarious by the day. The sheer volume of outside money flowing to self-funders like Tom Steyer and the viability of independents like Seth Bodnar demonstrate that the walls of the establishment fortress are easily breached.
We'll see you in November.
When you have reality star campaigns utilizing AI to bypass traditional media in Los Angeles and structural panic over 35% thresholds potentially leading to backroom conventions in Iowa, you are looking at a system deeply vulnerable to ideological and populist disruption. The rules designed to protect the parties are now the very things being used to dismantle them from the inside out.
But I think we can both agree on one central point as we conclude today's analysis. The 2026 midterm primaries represent a definitive, undeniable stress test for the American political establishment.
Absolutely. The traditional machinery of both the Democratic and Republican parties is being tested by unprecedented financial influxes, technological shifts, and deep, unyielding ideological pressures from their respective flanks.
Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, this just sounds like standard political games, consider the scale of what's happening here. It is vital to look beyond the simple, binary, blue versus red narrative.
Completely agree.
To truly understand where the country is heading, we have to examine these internal mechanics, the rules, the loopholes, and the active fractures within the parties themselves.
Because as we move toward the general election this November, and eventually the massive stakes of the 2028 presidential cycle, these specific primary dynamics will dictate whether the major parties evolve to meet the electorate or whether they shatter completely under the weight of their own contradictions.
We started today by talking about the Montana filing deadline stunt, a perfect example of a system straining to maintain control. Whether the political machinery holds firm or whether the rules fundamentally break down is a question that will ultimately be answered at the ballot box.
It always is.
We leave that conclusion to you, the listener. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.